Three wide receivers that you didn't think you'd be starting in your fantasy playoff matchup? Well, you might have good reason to do so. We'll tell you about it right now on Fantasy Football Today in 5. Time to look at the advanced stats with our Jacob Gibbs. I'm Adam Mazer here with your Saturday edition of Fantasy Football Today in 5. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Let's get a win. Let's hope these games actually get played. Okay, first guy we're talking about is Amanra St. Brown, coming off a couple of good performances. PPR stud lately. Can he do it again, Jacob?
Yeah, definitely a PPR stud. 20 catches in the last 2 games, 12 targets in each of those games. Yeah, I'm really liking the spot here for St. Brown. And I think if you are somebody who's going to be using the Arizona receivers, particularly in DFS, you should be bringing it back with St. Brown because, like, for Arizona to remain aggressive through the air, it's going to need, it's going to require to try to put some points on the board. And I'm not sure how they're going to do that without TJ Hawkinson and probably DeAndre Swift. The most likely way is St. Brown. So I really like the correlation here. We've seen him just really targeted at a high rate. He's one of just 5 players with a target share above 30% over the past 2 games. And I think that's going to continue. I mean, they just don't have very many options. And then he's also facing an Arizona defense that really suits his route tree well. They really keep everything in front of him and funnel, short and intermediate targets. And that's, of course, the type of routes that St. Brown is running. He's got a 6.64 yard average depth of target on the year, which is right in line with Arizona's opponent average depth of target of 6.55. So I think everything lines up really well for another high volume game from St. Brown. It might not be super efficient. Arizona does have a pretty good defense, and Detroit could struggle to put any points on the board. But if they're going to do it, I think it'll be through the rookie.
All right, if you are going with a wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals, which one would you choose?
I think Kirk projects better, and I think he's going to be the more popular play in DFS, and I think that makes sense. But I think it's important to not forget about AJ Green. I think he actually brings a lot of upside in this matchup. You never want to place a bet on AJ Green. He's been one of the least efficient receivers in the NFL over the last couple of years, particularly on deep targets, which is what we're going to focus on here. In this matchup against Detroit, the reason that we're focused on Green is because the Lions have just been targeted downfield at the highest rate in the NFL all year long. In neutral situations, they've led the NFL in average depth of target by their opponents the entire season. It's not been close. And they've also given up, yards at a really high rate and completion at a really high rate on those targets. And we saw when Hopkins was out earlier this season, Green was actually the player who saw his target per route run rate rise the most. He had the highest target per route run rate on the team, but I think it went a little overlooked because he didn't convert it into yards as efficiently as Christian Kirk did. But he saw the bigger boost of the two. And he also is the one who has a much deeper route tree. He had, led the team in air yards when Hopkins was out as well. So I think everything lines up well for him to be targeted aggressively downfield in this matchup. And if there's any secondary capable of boosting Green's efficiency, it is Detroit's. The only real question mark is how often is Arizona going to have to attack downfield? Yeah. But when they do, it should be to Green. And I think he actually could, come down with some big catches here.
All right, let's talk about Van Jefferson. This game is actually going to be played on Tuesday against the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks have given up 1 touchdown to a wide receiver in their last 9 games, but they did struggle with Brandon Cooks last week. It was their first game without Jamal Adams. I'm excited to start Van Jefferson, even with the touchdown stat that I just gave. Should I be?
I think you should be. Yeah, I think he's someone that you should feel, relatively comfortable starting in your fantasy playoff matchup this week. The Seahawks are one of the few teams that play zone as much as the Rams. They've used zone over 75% of the team, one of just 3 teams in the NFL to do that. And we've actually seen Stafford attack downfield at a much higher rate when facing zone, which is really unusual. He's one of the few quarterbacks who does that. His average depth of target is 19% above the league average when facing zone. It's actually 10% below the league average when facing man. And it was the same thing in Detroit as well. And so that brings us to Van Jefferson, who, of course, is, the preferred option downfield, especially if Beckham's not going to play. And Jefferson also has had significantly better splits versus zone coverage, which, again, this is atypical for a receiver who has such a deep route tree. But I think it makes sense given what we've seen from Stafford. So this year in particular, he's been 26% more likely to draw a target when facing zone coverage than man, and his yard per route run rate is up by 188% for zone coverage. Of course, there's some small sample sizing there. So for a larger sample size, his career splits, he's been targeted on 15% of his routes versus man coverage compared to 19% versus zone. And his yard per route run rate is up from 0.8 versus man to 1.9 versus zone. And that's for his career. So it's a relatively large sample size. So yeah, I do worry a little bit again about them needing to be aggressive through the air. They might just be, running the ball with a big lead against Seattle. But if they do throw, I think Jefferson it makes sense that he could, be targeted at a higher rate here, given what we've seen from him and Stafford throughout their career for so on.
Well, if they are, by the way, running the ball with a big lead against Seattle, that would be bad news for Rashad Penny, the number 1 waiver wire pickup of the week, but that's a topic for a different day. Thank you to Jacob Gibbs and to all of you for watching and listening. Have a great weekend. Good luck in Fantasy Week 15, and we'll talk to you with all the updates that you need on Sunday morning right here on FFT in 5.